Steve Nelle is a natural resource consultant for private lands in Texas. He has enjoyed a 48-year career working with private landowners, trying to gain a practical understanding of the complexities of this region and how to be a responsible custodian of the land. With that, Steve.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you for each of you for investing 2 days of your time to come to learn about, I call it Cedar, but this is the title of this presentation is Thinking About Cedar, but in a sense, it's the theme of the whole conference. We want to think seriously and critically and with an open mind about cedar. And when I say cedar, I think you know that I'm talking about Ashe Juniper, not other species. And specifically, we're talking about the context of the hill country portion of the Edwards Plateau, not across its entire range, although there's applications to be made. So that's the context, Ashe Juniper, hill country portion of the Edwards Plateau. Our job, my intent today, is to be like this old cow. She's already grazed. Her rumen is full of forage, and now she's ruminating. She's chewing on what she's ingested, and she's trying to extract all the benefit out of it that she can. Likewise, for you and I, our job is to ruminate on what we hear and to chew on it and to think about what we're hearing. My thinking about cedar began to change over 35 years ago when I read this book by Del Winiger. I had been trained and taught all of the conventional wisdom about cedar during my career, and to some extent I believed it because I didn't know any better. But this book sort of got me to thinking, because not everything was adding up in what I thought I understood. So in this book, Winiger compiles hundreds and hundreds of pre-1860 accounts, eyewitness first-hand accounts of what the early explorers saw when they traveled across Texas. And chapter 5 is about the hill country. And here's what Winiger says in relation to the junipers. He says, when we turn to the question of the junipers in the hill country, we approach a hot issue. The very mention of these calls up strong emotion and prejudices. And it's still true today. It may be more true now than it was earlier, that we bring a lot of baggage as we think about cedar and the things we believe and our opinions and our thoughts and our perceptions about cedar. So I want to ask you, what do you personally perceive about cedar? How do you perceive cedar? What are your opinions? What are your beliefs? What have you been taught? Where did those perceptions come from? Do you consider cedar to be good, bad? Is it ugly? Is it beautiful? Is it a noxious invader? Is it a desirable native? Is cedar a blessing or is it a curse? We all have our opinions. We all have our perspectives about cedar. And so what I'm going to ask you to do and myself to do is, regardless of your beliefs and opinions about cedar, for these 2 days, it would be good if we would temporarily set our opinions aside, put them in your back pocket, don't discard them, but to set them aside for 2 days so that we might be able to maybe soak in and absorb some new information. Because if our perceptions are clouded by old paradigms and emotions, it's going to hinder our learning. We are prone to what's called confirmation bias, which means that we will do just about anything to protect and defend and confirm the things we already believe. And that hinders us from being able to learn new information. So I invite you to temporarily set aside what you think you know about cedar and be prepared to perhaps learn some new things and enrich our knowledge about cedar. So I'm going to pose a series of questions to you, and the only purpose in these questions, there's only one purpose, and that is to get you and me, get our minds in gear to start thinking about cedar with logic, with clear thinking, with critical observation. And it's not so much that we're going to answer all of these with a perfectly clear answer, but it's just to get us to thinking about cedar. That's the only purpose for me starting out this way, as a way of introducing the rest of the program. So, starting with the questions. Was the hill country once vast open grassland, as we have all heard? If it was a grassland, did cedar destroy the grasslands? Was it a vast woodland? Was it variously wooded and grassed, but with limited cedar? And here's the big question we all want to know. What did the hill country really look like in pre-settlement times? What was the historic fire regime in the hill country? Is fire the answer to our cedar problems? Does cedar create extreme fire danger? Do our current ecological site descriptions need to be revised with regard to cedar dynamics? Or are they accurate and complete the way they exist right now? Is cedar indicative of sick, degraded land? Or is it nature's way to help heal the land? Does cedar cause erosion, or does it help build soil? Does an increase of cedar degrade or enhance the landscape? Is a cedar break a sterile environment? Is cedar allelopathic? All of these questions stem from commonly held beliefs about cedar and some of the new information that is coming out. How much water does cedar use? How much rainfall does it intercept? Does cedar desiccate, or does it help hydrate the landscape? Does control of cedar enhance aquifer recharge and cause dormant springs to flow? Where does more rainfall typically soak into the ground? Here or here? How is the karst and epikarst affected by cedar and cedar management? How effectively do cedar woodlands sequester carbon? Is the golden cheek warbler and the Endangered Species Act reason enough to maintain vast cedar woodlands? How severely does cedar impact and impair livestock production and wildlife management? And I can tell you that for this particular photo, this was one of the few places in that pasture where you could even see the ground. The rest of it was covered with cedar. Does cedar need to be removed, reduced, maintained, or allowed to increase? What is the right balance between cedar and grassland? And I need to say that for each of these questions, obviously they're oversimplified questions that really can't be answered because every piece of land is different. Each landowner has different objectives, and so the answers to these questions are going to vary from place to place and over time. But again, the only purpose is to get us to thinking, get our minds thinking about cedar and some of the things we think we know and some of the things that will be discussed this week. Is there a valid place for aggressive cedar control on some ranches? Was Grandpa wrong to clear all the cedar off his place? In what ways does cedar control equate to good land stewardship? And then the converse of that, in what ways does cedar control equate to poor land stewardship? And maybe a more important question is, what is real land stewardship? Are cedar dynamics complex or simple? And this question leads me to one of my favorite quotes by H.L. Mencken. For every complex problem, there is a solution that is simple, neat, and wrong. It applies to so many areas of life. Last question. Have we sometimes applied simplistic solutions to complex problems? Originally, I was going to entitle this presentation Understanding Cedar. Then I began to consider what would that mean if we really understood cedar. And here's what it would entail. The relationship between cedar and soil, the water cycle, the karst, fire, ranching, wildlife management, plant and animal diversity, economics, land value, aesthetic value, the whole tradition and culture of land ownership and land management, the whole array of political, legal, and social dynamics that surrounds this area, endangered species, land fragmentation, the carbon cycle, and that's probably just the tip of the iceberg. And then there are relationships between and amongst all of these factors. So you begin to see what would it mean if we really understood cedar. It's a spider web, and we're not anywhere close to understanding cedar. But during this conference, we're going to have a few new pieces of the puzzle illuminated. We're going to be farther along the road of understanding cedar at the end of this conference than we are right now. So this is a friend of mine who ranches in cedar country, and he attempts to think about cedar in a holistic way, just like he does all the other aspects of his ranching operation. So that's really what our goal today is to think about cedar, try to do so in a holistic manner, not thinking just about cedar, but about all of the other things that affect and influence the cedar landscape. And I guess I should pause and remind us all what we should already know is that the people who actually manage cedar landscapes are the private landowners across this region. And our job, if we're in a role to advise landowners, our job is not to spell out precisely, exactly, and what we think they should do on their land. That usually doesn't work very well. Our job is to educate and inform and to get them to thinking about and learning about cedar so that they make good decisions, because the decisions they make are going to be better than if they just receive coercion from or arm twisting from one of us about how we think they should manage the land. So we need to keep that in mind. Aldo Leopold said that the urge to comprehend must precede the urge to reform. And for about the last 100 years, we have tried to reform cedar landscapes without really comprehending cedar landscapes. So we've sort of violated that law there. There's Leopold, the professor and the ecologist. Here's Leopold, the philosopher. I like to think of Leopold in that context. He's sitting there resting against a tree in Mexico on a deer hunt, and he was a big thinker. He spent time thinking and contemplating and ruminating on man's relationship to the land, and that's what we need to do. This is Tom Lassiter, extremely well-known livestock producer whose philosophies and principles are still being followed and promoted today. He was the originator and the developer of the breed of cattle known as Beefmaster. Here's what Lassiter said: I would rather make a rancher out of a boy off the streets of New York or Tokyo than a boy raised on a conventional ranch. It applies to what we're doing here today, because sometimes the more that we think we know about a subject, the further we are from the truth. And if we think we already know the answers, our mind is blocked to learning new information. And so sometimes we actually have to unlearn some things that we thought we knew before we can move ahead in our knowledge about really any subject. So at the end of tomorrow, we're not going to have a full understanding of cedar, but we should be farther along, a few more pieces of the puzzle. Each speaker is going to illuminate certain things about cedar, and when we put all those things together, we're going to have a little bit better picture than we do right now. Not a complete, full, illuminated picture, but a greater understanding after we have spent our time, listening and thinking and being open-minded about this subject. So again, my admonition to you and to myself is to be like this old cow and to spend the time during the conference and after of chewing on and ruminating and thinking about cedar and trying to extract all of the benefit that we can from this conference. So that's the message I came to deliver as a way of introduction. I'm looking forward to each and every presentation. And so let's go ahead and dive into the rest of the program. Thank you.